Chapter 3 1971 The Gangulis have moved to a university town outside Boston. As far as they know, they are the only Bengali residents. The town has a historic district, a brief strip of colonial architecture visited by tourists on summer weekends. There is a white steepled Congregational church, a stone courthouse with an adjoining jail, a cupolaed public library, a wooden well from which Paul Revere is rumored to have drunk. In winter, tapers burn in the windows of homes after dark. Ashok has been hired as an assistant professor of electrical engineering at the university. In exchange for teaching 5 classes, he earns $16,000 a year. He is given his own office, with his name etched onto a strip of black plastic by the door. He shares, along with the other members of his department, the services of an elderly secretary named Mrs. Jones, who often puts a plate of homemade banana bread by the coffee percolator in the staff room. Ashok suspects that Mrs. Jones, whose husband used to teach in the English department until his death, is about his own mother's age. Mrs. Jones leads a life that Ashok's mother would consider humiliating. Eating alone, driving herself to work in snow and sleet, seeing her children and grandchildren at most 3 or 4 times a year. The job is everything Ashok has ever dreamed of. He has always hoped to teach in a university rather than work for a corporation. What a thrill, he thinks, to stand lecturing before a room full of American students. What a sense of accomplishment it gives him to see his name printed under faculty in the university directory. What joy each time Mrs. Jones says to him, "Professor Ganguly, your wife is on the phone." From his 4th floor office, he has a sweeping view of the quadrangle, surrounded by vine-covered brick buildings, and on pleasant days he takes his lunch on a bench, listening to the melody of bells chiming from the campus clock tower. On Fridays, after he has taught his last class, he visits the library to read international newspapers on long wooden poles. He reads about US planes bombing Viet Cong supply routes in Cambodia, Naxalites being murdered on the streets of Calcutta, India and Pakistan going to war. At times he wanders up to the library's sun-filled, unpopulated top floor, where all the literature is shelved. He browses in the aisles, gravitating most often toward his beloved Russians, where he is particularly comforted each time by his son's name stamped in golden letters on the spines of a row of red and green and blue hardbound books. For Ashima, migrating to the suburbs feels more drastic, more distressing than the move from Calcutta to Cambridge had been. She wishes Ashok had accepted the position at Northeastern so that they could have stayed in the city. She is stunned that in this town there are no sidewalks to speak of, no street lights, no public transportation, no stores for miles at a time. She has no interest in learning how to drive the new Toyota Corolla it is now necessary for them to own. Though no longer pregnant, she continues, at times, to mix Rice Krispies and peanuts and onions in a bowl. For being a foreigner, Ashima is beginning to realize, is a sort of lifelong pregnancy, a perpetual weight, a constant burden, a continuous feeling out of sorts. It is an ongoing responsibility, a parenthesis in what had once been an ordinary life, only to discover that that previous life has vanished, replaced by something more complicated and demanding. Like pregnancy, being a foreigner, Ashima believes, is something that elicits the same curiosity from strangers, the same combination of pity and respect. Her forays out of the apartment while her husband is at work are limited to the university within which they live and to the historic district that flanks the campus on one edge. She wanders around with Gogol, letting him run across the quadrangle, or sitting with him on rainy days to watch television in the student lounge. Once a week, she makes 30 samosas to sell at the International Coffee House for 25 cents each, next to the linzer squares baked by Miss Etzold and baklava by Miss Casolis. On Fridays, she takes Gogol to the public library for children's story hour. After he turns 4, she drops him off and fetches him from the university-run nursery school 3 mornings a week. For the hours that Gogol is at nursery school, finger painting and learning the English alphabet, Ashima is despondent, unaccustomed, all over again, to being on her own. She misses her son's habit of always holding on to the free end of her sari as they walk together. She misses the sound of his sulky, high-pitched little boy voice, telling her that he is hungry, or tired, or needs to go to the bathroom. To avoid being alone at home, she sits in the reading room of the public library in a cracked leather armchair, writing letters to her mother, or reading magazines, or one of her Bengali books from home. The room is cheerful, filled with light, with a tomato-colored carpet on the floor and people reading the paper around a big, round wooden table with forsythias or cattails arranged at its center. When she misses Gogol especially, she wanders into the children's room. There, pinned to a bulletin board, is a picture of him in profile, sitting cross-legged on a cushion during story hour, listening to the children's librarian, Mrs. Aiken, reading The Cat in the Hat. After 2 years in an overheated, university-subsidized apartment, Ashima and Ashok are ready to purchase a home. In the evenings, after dinner, they set out in their car, Gogol in the back seat, to look at houses for sale. They do not look in the historic district where the chairman of Ashok's department lives. in an 18th century mansion to which he and Ashima and Gogol are invited once a year for Boxing Day tea. Instead, they look on ordinary roads where plastic wading pools and basketball bats are left out on the lawns. All the houses belong to Americans. Shoes are worn inside. Trays of cat litter are placed in the kitchens. Dogs bark and jump when Ashima and Ashok ring the bell. They learn the names of the different architectural styles: cape, salt box, raised ranch, garrison. In the end, they decide on a shingled two-story colonial in a recently built development, a house previously occupied by no one, erected on a quarter-acre of land. This is the small patch of America to which they lay claim. Gogol accompanies his parents to banks, sits waiting as they sign the endless papers. The mortgage is approved and the move is scheduled for spring. Ashok and Ashima are amazed when, moving by U-Haul to the new house, to discover how much they possess. Each of them had come to America with a single suitcase, a few weeks' worth of clothes. Now there are enough old issues of the Globe stacked in the corners of the apartment to wrap all their plates and glasses. There are whole years of Time magazine to toss out. The walls of the new house are painted, the driveway sealed with pitch, the shingles and sun deck waterproofed and stained. Ashok takes photographs of every room, Gogol standing somewhere in the frame, to send to relatives in India. There are pictures of Gogol opening up the refrigerator, pretending to talk on the phone. He is a sturdily built child, with full cheeks, but already pensive features. When he poses for the camera, he has to be coaxed into a smile. The house is 15 minutes from the nearest supermarket, 40 minutes from a mall. The address is 67 Pemberton Road. Their neighbors are the Johnsons, the Mertons, the Aspers, the Hills. There are 4 modest bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, 8-foot ceilings, a 1-car garage. In the living room is a brick fireplace and a bay window overlooking the yard. In the kitchen, there are matching yellow appliances, a Lazy Susan, linoleum made to look like tiles, a watercolor by Ashima's father of a caravan of camels in a desert in Rajasthan is framed at the local print shop and hung on the living room wall. Gogol has a room of his own, a bed built with a built-in drawer in its base, metal shelves that hold Tinker toys, Lincoln logs, a Viewmaster, and Etch-a-Sketch. Most of Gogol's toys come from yard sales, as does most of the furniture, and the curtains, and the toaster, and a set of pots and pans. At first, Ashima is reluctant to introduce such items into her home, ashamed at the thought of buying what had originally belonged to strangers. American strangers at that. But Ashok points out that even his chairman shops at yard sales, that in spite of living in a mansion, an American is not above wearing a pair of second-hand pants bought for 50 cents. When they first move into the house, the grounds have yet to be landscaped. No trees grow on the property. No shrubs flank the front door, so that the cement of the foundation is clearly visible to the eye. And so, for the first few months, 4-year-old Gogol plays on an uneven, dirt-covered yard, littered with stones and sticks, soiling his sneakers, leaving footprints in his path. It is among his earliest memories. For the rest of his life, he will remember that cold, overcast spring, digging in the dirt, collecting rocks, discovering black and yellow salamanders beneath an overturned slab of slate. He will remember the sounds of the other children in the neighborhood, laughing and pedaling their big wheels down the road. He will remember the warm, bright summer's day when the topsoil was poured from the back of a truck, and stepping onto the sun deck a few weeks later with both of his parents, to see thin blades of grass emerge from the bald, black lawn. In the beginning, in the evenings, his family goes for drives, exploring their new environs bit by bit, the neglected dirt lanes, the shaded back roads, the farms where one could pick pumpkins in autumn and buy berries sold in green cardboard boxes in July. The back seat of the car is sheathed with plastic. The ashtrays on the doors are still sealed. They drive until it grows dark, without destination in mind, past hidden ponds and graveyards, cul-de-sac and dead ends. Sometimes they drive out of the town altogether, to one of the beaches along the North Shore. Even in summer, they never go to swim or to turn brown beneath the sun. Instead, they go dressed in their ordinary clothes. By the time they arrive, the ticket collector's booth is empty. The crowds are gone. There is only a handful of cars in the parking lot, and the only other visitors are the people walking their dogs, or watching the sunset, or dragging metal detectors through the sand. Together, as the Gangulis drive, they anticipate the moment the thin blue line of the ocean will come into view. On the beach, Gogol collects rocks, digs tunnels in the sand. He and his father wander barefoot, their pant legs rolled halfway up their calves. He watches his father raise a kite within minutes into the wind, so high that Gogol must tip his head back in order to see, a rippling speck against the sky. The wind whips around their ears, turning their faces cold. Snowy gulls hover with wings spread, low enough to touch. Gogol darts in and out of the ocean, making faint, temporary footprints, soaking all the rolled-up cuffs. His mother cries out, laughing, as she lifts her sari a few inches above her ankles, her slippers in one hand, and places her feet in foaming, ice-cold water. She reaches out to Gogol, takes his hand. "Not so far," she tells him. The waves retract, gathering force. The soft, dark sand seeming to shift away instantly beneath their feet, causing them to lose their balance. "I'm falling, it's pulling me in," she always says. The August that Gogol turns 5, Ashima discovers she is pregnant again. In the mornings she forces herself to eat a slice of toast, only because Ashok makes it for her and watches her while she chews it in bed. Her head constantly spins. She spends her days lying down, a pink plastic waste paper basket by her side, the shades drawn, her mouth and teeth coated with the taste of metal. She watches The Price is Right and Guiding Light and the $10,000 Pyramid on television. Ashok moves in from the living room to her side of the bed. Staggering out to the kitchen at lunchtime to prepare a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for Gogol, she is revolted by the odor of the fridge, convinced that the contents of her vegetable drawers have been replaced with garbage, that meat is rotting on the shelves. Sometimes Gogol lies beside her in his parents' bedroom, reading a picture book or coloring with crayons. "You're going to be an older brother," she tells him one day. "There'll be someone to call you Dada. Won't that be exciting?" Sometimes, if she is feeling energetic, she asks Gogol to go and get a photo album, and together they look at pictures of Gogol's grandparents and his uncles and aunts and cousins, of whom, in spite of his one visit to Calcutta, he has no memory. She teaches him to memorize a 4-line children's poem by Tagore and the names of the deities adorning the 10-handed goddess Durga during puja. Saraswati with her swan and Kartik with his peacock to her left, Lakshmi with her owl and Ganesh with his mouse to her right. Every afternoon Ashima sleeps, but before nodding off, she switches the television to channel 2 and tells Gogol to watch Sesame Street and The Electric Company in order to keep up with the English he uses at nursery school. In the evening, Gogol and his father eat together, alone, a week's worth of chicken curry and rice, which his father cooks in 2 battered Dutch ovens every Sunday. As the food reheats, his father tells Gogol to shut the bedroom door because his mother cannot tolerate the smell. It is odd to see his father presiding in the kitchen, standing in his mother's place at the stove. When they sit down at the table, the sound of his parents' conversation is missing, as is the sound of the television in the living room playing the news. His father eats with his hand bent over his plate, flipping through the latest issue of Time, occasionally glancing at Gogol to make sure he is eating as well. Though his father remembers to mix up the rice and curry for Gogol beforehand, he doesn't bother to shape it into individual balls the way his mother does, lining them around his plate like the numbers on a clock face. Gogol has already been taught to eat with his own fingers, not to let the food stain the skin of his palm. He has learned to suck the marrow from lamb, to extract the bones from fish. But without his mother at the table, he does not feel like eating. He keeps wishing every evening that she would emerge from the bedroom and sit between him and his father, filling the air with her sari and cardigan smell. He grows bored of eating the same thing day after day, and one evening he discreetly pushes the remaining food to the side. With his index finger, in the traces of leftover sauce, he begins to draw on his plate. He plays tic-tac-toe. "Finish," his father says, glancing up from his magazine. "Don't play with food that way." "I'm full, Baba." "There's still some food on your plate." "Baba, I can't." His father's plate is polished clean, the chicken bones denuded of cartilage and chewed to a pinkish pulp. The bay leaf and cinnamon stick as good as new. Ashok shakes his head at Gogol, disapproving, unyielding. Each day Ashok is pained by the half-eaten sandwiches people toss into garbage cans on campus, apples abandoned after 1 or 2 bites. "Finish it, Gogol. At your age, I ate tin." Because his mother tends to vomit the moment she finds herself in a moving car, she is unable to accompany her husband to take Gogol in September of 1973 to his first day of kindergarten at the town's public elementary school. By the time Gogol starts, it is already the school's second week of school year. But for the past week, Gogol has been in bed, just like his mother, listless, without appetite, claiming to have a stomachache, even vomiting one day into his mother's pink waste paper basket. He doesn't want to go to kindergarten. He doesn't want to wear the new clothes his mother has bought him from Sears, hanging on a knob of his dresser, or carry his Charlie Brown lunchbox, or board the yellow school bus that stops at the end of Pemberton Road. The school, unlike the nursery school, is several miles from the house, several miles from the university. On numerous occasions he has been driven to see the building, a low, long, brick structure with a perfectly flat roof and a flag that flaps at the top of a tall white pole planted on the lawn. There is a reason Gogol doesn't want to go to kindergarten. His parents have told him that at school, instead of being called Gogol, he will be called by a new name, a good name, which his parents have finally decided on, just in time for him to begin his formal education. The name, Nikhil, is artfully connected to the old. Not only is it a perfectly respectable Bengali good name, meaning he who is entire, encompassing all, but it also bears a satisfying resemblance to Nikolai, the first name of the Russian Gogol. Ashok had thought of it recently, staring mindlessly at the Gogol spines in the library, and he had rushed back to the house to ask Ashima her opinion. He pointed out that it was relatively easy to pronounce, though there was the danger that Americans obsessed with abbreviation would truncate it to Nick. She told him she liked it well enough, though later, alone, she had wept, thinking of her grandmother who had died earlier in the year, and of the letter, forever hovering somewhere between India and America. containing the good name she had chosen for Gogol. Ashima still dreams of the letter at times, discovering it after all these years in the mailbox on Pemberton Road, opening it up only to find it blank. But Gogol doesn't want a new name. He can't understand why he has to answer to anything else. "Why do I have to have a new name?" he asks his parents, tears springing to his eyes. It would be one thing if his parents were to call him Nikhil, too, but they tell him that the new name will be used only by the teachers and children at school. He is afraid to be Nikhil, someone he doesn't know, who doesn't know him. His parents tell him that they each have two names too, as do all their Bengali friends in America and all their relatives in Calcutta. It's a part of growing up, they tell him, part of being a Bengali. They write it for him on a sheet of paper, ask him to copy it over 10 times. "Don't worry," his father says. "To me and your mother you will never be anyone but Gogol."